Right there on the sidewalk outside a crowded cafe, the small hands of 12-year-old Daniel, a homeless boy fighting just to survive, were pressing desperately on the chest of an elderly man who had collapsed from a sudden heart attack. Using the CPR technique his fallen soldier father once taught him, Daniel poured every ounce of strength he had into keeping a stranger alive until help arrived. And all of it unfolded under the stunned gaze of Officer James, who witnessed every second of the miracle created by a boy the world had forgotten. But what happens after that moment could lead Daniel into a new life, or drag him into a deeper darkness. Stay with me, because what comes next may break your heart and heal it at the same time. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story. A warm, late-afternoon haze drifted across the busy street as the city pulsed with its usual Saturday noise. In front of the crowded Cornerstone Cafe, a small figure sat quietly on the pavement, Daniel Collins, a 12-year-old black boy with thin arms, dark, expressive eyes, and a frame that looked as if the world had worn it down too early. His curly hair was uneven, as though cut by his own hands, and his oversized hoodie, frayed at the sleeves, barely shielded him from the breeze. He held a paper cup with a few coins inside, tapping its rim rhythmically, a habit that helped calm the persistent ache of being noticed only when ignored. Daniel had learned to remain invisible, not through choice but through circumstance, after losing his father, Staff Sergeant Michael Collins, a disciplined yet gentle soldier whose death in active duty carved a silent, permanent wound inside the boy. The cafe behind him bustled. Lively conversations, clinking cups, the scent of roasted coffee. But Daniel kept his gaze low, studying the shoes of passers-by as though they carried stories he wasn't allowed to read. He was used to the rhythm of rejection. Boots, heels, sneakers walking past, occasionally slowing out of curiosity before speeding up again out of guilt. Still, he stayed, because staying alive meant staying close to where people passed. Suddenly, a loud thud shattered the normal city cadence. At a table near the window sat David Whitmore, a man in his late 60s with a dignified posture and an aura of quiet authority. David was tall, with silver-white hair combed neatly backward, skin weathered like someone who had lived many lives, and eyes framed by deep lines that hinted at both wisdom and burdens. He always dressed in tailored shirts and dark slacks, the subtle elegance of a man accustomed to leadership. Unknown to the crowd, he was the CEO of a thriving architectural materials company, but today he simply appeared like another elderly customer enjoying his afternoon coffee. Until he froze, then clutched his chest. His face twisted in agony, the color draining into an ash-gray pallor. His breathing became jagged, and then he collapsed forward onto the table. The entire cafe erupted into panic, chairs scraping, mugs knocking onto the floor. A woman with a floral dress gasped. A young man scrambled to dial emergency services, though his hands shook violently. A teenager fumbled uselessly with her phone, tears blurring her vision. Chaos began swallowing reason. But Daniel, who had lived through grief early and understood that fear never saved anyone, felt something sharpen inside him. A memory, his father's voice. If someone falls and their breathing stops, you don't wait. You act, Danny. You act, even if you're scared. The boy dropped his paper cup, coins scattering like startled insects, and sprinted toward David with surprising speed. People stared, confused. Why was a homeless child rushing in when adults froze? Daniel knelt, beside the fallen man, his breath trembling but his hands determined. "Sir? Sir? Can you hear me?" There was no response, only the terrifying stillness of a heart that had forgotten its rhythm. Daniel's chest tightened. A familiar helplessness tried to rise, an echo of the day he found his father's folded flag instead of his father's hug. But he pushed the feeling down. Fear was a luxury. Action was survival. He tilted David's head back, checked the airway just as he'd been taught, and lowered his ear to the man's mouth. No breath. His pulse hammered painfully. A whisper escaped him. "Please don't die. Please." Then he placed his hands, small, thin, trembling, over the older man's sternum and began chest compressions. Press. Count. Breathe. Press. Count. Breathe. Every push was a battle against doubt. Every breath borrowed from hope. Sweat formed on his brow, but he didn't stop. The crowd watched in stunned silence. For a moment it seemed as if the city itself had paused to witness a boy fighting death with bare hands and borrowed courage. Across the street, Officer James Turner stood beside his patrol car. James was a 35-year-old policeman with broad shoulders, deep-set eyes, and a rugged jaw covered in a short, well-kept beard. His dark uniform hugged a frame hardened by years of service, but his expression carried the softness of someone who still believed good people existed. Years earlier, a botched operation had led to the injury of a civilian under his watch, leaving James determined to never again hesitate when someone needed help. Now he watched in awe. He had seen men freeze under pressure. He had seen trained adults panic. But this small boy kneeling over a stranger's body delivering CPR with the precision of someone twice his age, this was something he had never witnessed. "Keep going, kid," James whispered unconsciously, though the boy couldn't hear him. After what felt like an eternity, David jerked slightly. A shallow breath pushed through his lips. A woman cried out in relief. Another clasped her hands together, whispering prayers. Daniel exhaled shakily, tears springing to his eyes, not from fear anymore, but from overwhelming relief. Moments later, the ambulance arrived, paramedics rushing in to take over. As they lifted David onto the stretcher, one of them glanced at Daniel with disbelief. "You saved his life, kid." Daniel didn't respond. He simply stared at his hands, still trembling, realizing they had done something extraordinary. Officer James stepped forward then, kneeling beside the boy. "Hey, what's your name?" Daniel hesitated before answering softly, "Daniel." James studied the boy's tired eyes, his worn-down clothes, the loneliness wrapped around him like a second skin. And yet, moments ago, this boy acted with the courage of a soldier. In that instant, James understood. Daniel wasn't just a homeless child. He was a hero that no one had ever noticed. But someone had noticed now, and nothing would be the same after this. "Giddy-kirk?" A brisk wind swept across the intersection, carrying the sharp scent of car exhaust and the distant aroma of roasted nuts from a street vendor. Officer James Turner, still recalling the image of Daniel's trembling hands saving a dying man, guided his patrol car toward the red light. Rex, his 4-year-old canine partner, a sturdy German shepherd with a thick sable coat, sharp amber eyes, and the calm discipline of a seasoned working dog, sat alert in the passenger seat. Rex had been rescued from an abusive owner before joining the force, and the trauma of his early years left him fiercely protective of children and instinctively wary of aggressive adults. As the light turned yellow, James spotted a familiar silhouette. On the median strip, weaving between rows of cars with a small spray bottle in hand, was Daniel. The boy looked even smaller under the gray sky, bundled in a hoodie that hung off one shoulder, his jeans torn at both knees, his shoes mismatched and worn. His movements were careful and apologetic, as though afraid to take up space. Every time a window rolled down, he flinched slightly, unsure whether he would receive coins or curses. A pang tightened James's chest. He had hoped anyone had stepped in to help the boy since the day of the CPR incident, but life wasn't a fairy tale, and the world rarely rewarded the brave. As James prepared to pull over, a large shadow approached Daniel. A man lumbered toward him from behind a row of parked cars. He was in his early 40s, tall, overweight, and rough-looking. His skin was ruddy and blotched as if years of drinking had carved it into permanent irritation. A greasy ponytail hung down his back, and his thick beard, patchy and tangled, covered a jawline hardened by a lifetime of street brawls. His name, overheard faintly when he barked orders at other children, was Branco, a man whose reputation for using kids as tools was whispered in alleys but rarely proven. Branco grabbed Daniel's shoulder with a hand like a vice. The boy stiffened instantly. James saw the fear flicker across Daniel's face, the kind that came from familiarity, not surprise. "Move," Branco growled, his deep voice slurred with impatience. "You're too slow today." Daniel nodded quickly, eyes lowered, like someone trying not to provoke a blow. Rex, from inside the cruiser, let out a low, menacing rumble. James glanced at him and understood. This wasn't a harmless guardian. This was a threat. James parked half a block away and followed on foot, keeping distance. Branco pushed Daniel across the intersection toward a narrow street lined with shuttered shops and old brick walls stained by years of rain. Halfway down the alley stood several more children, 5 or 6, each no older than 14. They carried rags, small buckets, or trays of cheap trinkets. Their faces were gray with exhaustion, their eyes hollow with resignation. A thin girl with braids and a missing front tooth, likely around 9, looked at Daniel with a fleeting spark of recognition before quickly turning away to avoid Branco's glare. Behind them loomed a man sitting on a broken plastic chair. He was older, in his late 50s, tall but gaunt, with sunken cheeks and narrow, calculating eyes. His name was Merrick, a former street hustler whose ruthless ambition had twisted him into a predator of the vulnerable. His thinning gray hair was slicked back, revealing a forehead permanently creased with suspicion. Merrick's lips formed a smirk when he saw Branco dragging Daniel in. "Late again," Merrick said, tapping a notebook with a pen. "The others turned in their first collection an hour ago." Daniel mumbled, I'm sorry. I was trying." "Trying doesn't keep the lights on," Merrick snapped. "You kids bring in money or you bring in problems. Choose." Branco shoved Daniel toward a stack of crates. "He'll do better, won't you?" Daniel nodded silently. James's jaw tightened. Each second he watched confirmed that this was no informal group of poor kids helping each other survive. This was exploitation. Organized, controlled, cruel. Rex, now out of the car beside James, kept low, ears pinned forward, pupils sharp with instinctive recognition of danger and dominance displays. James pulled out his phone and discreetly recorded everything. Branco's threats, Merrick's accounting book, the children's frightened compliance. He recognized patterns. Quotas enforced by violence, money funneled through a single leader, children kept hungry enough to obey. He backed away before being noticed, then radioed his sergeant. "This is Turner. I've located a child exploitation ring operating behind Westwood Avenue. Multiple minors involved. Requesting immediate backup and child services." The response came quickly. "Copy that, Turner. Units en route." Within minutes, patrol cars approached from both ends of the alley, sirens muted to preserve the element of surprise. Officers surrounded the area. Branco tried to flee, but Rex leapt forward with controlled precision, forcing the man to freeze with a bark that echoed between the buildings. Merrick attempted to hide the notebook, but officers found it tucked under his chair. The children, huddled together, watched in silence as the adults who had controlled them were cuffed and escorted away. Daniel stood apart, gripping the sleeves of his hoodie, unsure if he was safe or in trouble. James approached him gently. "You're okay now," he said, kneeling to Daniel's eye level. The boy's tight expression softened, a rare crack in his practiced mask of strength. "Am I going to jail?" Daniel whispered. James shook his head firmly. "No, you're going somewhere safe, I promise." Rex pressed his nose against Daniel's hand, and the boy let out the smallest, most fragile breath, half sob, half relief. For the first time in a long while, Daniel believed someone meant those words. And for the first time, James felt certain their lives had just become permanently intertwined. The hospital room was illuminated by soft afternoon sunlight filtering through wide blinds, creating long horizontal stripes across the white sheets where David Whitmore lay recovering. His breathing was steadier now, though each inhale still carried the fragility of someone whose heart had recently plunged into darkness and clawed its way back up. David, a man in his late 60s with sharp features softened only by age and sorrow, slowly pushed himself to sit upright. His hair, silver and immaculate even after the emergency, framed a face marked by decades of ambition and responsibility. He was tall for his age, with broad shoulders that had not yet bowed to time, and eyes of deep blue that had once intimidated boardrooms but now carried something gentler, a quiet gratitude for a second chance. For most of his life, David was the kind of man newspapers photographed at groundbreaking ceremonies. CEO of Whitmore Structural Innovations, a leading company specializing in high-end architectural materials. His reputation was built on meticulous craftsmanship, unwavering ethics, and an ability to turn ideas into steel and stone. But beneath that public legacy lived a more private one, his years as a young soldier and the memory of one man who had saved him in the desert long ago, Staff Sergeant Michael Collins. As hospital monitors beeped in steady rhythm, David replayed the moment he collapsed at the cafe and the small pair of hands that brought him back. The paramedics had mentioned it in passing. A kid did CPR. Saved you, sir. We'd have lost you otherwise. A kid. Thin, young, frantic but precise. A kid who knew what he was doing. A kid who shouldn't have been there but was. A kid whose face David remembered in fragments between his fading pulses. David swung his legs over the bed, ignoring the nurse's protests. "I need to find that boy," he insisted, voice still weak but filled with determination. "He saved my life." The nurse exchanged glances with a doctor, Dr. Alvarez, a middle-aged man with olive skin, tired eyes, and a thick salt-and-pepper beard that softened his otherwise stern expression. Alvarez was known for his warm bedside manner and his refusal to give up on hopeless patients. He stepped forward. "Sir, you just came out of a myocardial infarction. You shouldn't be moving." "I'm alive because of that boy," David replied firmly. "Tell me where to sign to discharge myself." After reluctantly agreeing to observe him a few more hours before release, Dr. Alvarez finally called someone who might help. Officer James Turner. A few hours later, James arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, uniform crisp, face set in that stoic calm he carried during tough calls. His short beard framed a jaw sharpened by discipline and long nights. His deep-set brown eyes studied David with cautious respect. Rex trotted beside him, tail low, protective yet curious. "You're the officer who saw the boy?" David asked. "Yes, sir," James replied. "His name is Daniel Collins." The air seemed to vanish. David gripped the bedsheet. "What, did you say his last name was?" "Collins." James tilted his head, confused. "Is something wrong?" David's heart thudded in his chest, not with illness, but recognition. Collins. The same name he had repeated in prayer, in grief, in survivor's guilt for more than 30 years. "Daniel," David whispered. "How does he look? Age? Build?" 12. Small for his age, skinny, curly hair, dark skin, very polite, very quiet. David shut his eyes. Michael Collins had married a black woman before deployment. He remembered the wedding invitation, the handwritten signature at the bottom. "Your brother-in-arms, Michael." Hands trembling, David looked at James. "I need to see him. Now." James nodded and led the way. After the city finished processing the child exploitation case, the rescued children were taken to a temporary safe facility run by social workers. It was there, in a modest office smelling faintly of crayons and disinfectant, that David finally saw Daniel again. The boy sat at a table coloring with worn pencils. His thin shoulders hunched as though bracing for bad news. His eyes, those deep, solemn eyes, lifted when the door opened. Recognition flickered. "You're the man from the cafe," Daniel whispered. "The one you saved," David finished softly. He knelt down, slowly, carefully, so he wouldn't tower over the child who had carried the weight of survival alone for too long. "You saved my life, Daniel. I owe you more than words." Daniel blinked, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to being thanked. He wasn't used to being seen. David offered a gentle smile. "May I know your full name?" "Daniel Collins," the boy said quietly. The name struck David like a blow. His voice shook. "Collins, did your father's name happen to be Michael Collins?" Daniel's face brightened, but bittersweetly. "Yes, my dad was a soldier. He died when I was little." The world seemed to blur. David felt the years ripple back, the sand, the explosions, the cries for cover, the moment Michael shoved him out of the blast radius, the moment a hero fell so another could live. "Your father," David's voice cracked, raw and unpolished. "Your father saved my life. He was my brother in that war, and now, you've saved me too." Daniel's breath caught, as if hearing that his father mattered to someone meant more than anything else in the world. James watched quietly, struck by the symmetry of fate unfolding before him. After a long silence, David straightened, wiping a tear discreetly. "Daniel, where's your mother?" "She died 2 years after Dad." "And who has been caring for you?" Daniel hesitated. "No one. I tried to stay with some people, but then I ended up on the streets." A storm tightened behind. David's composed expression. Not anger at the boy, but rage at the system that failed him. "That shouldn't be possible," he murmured. "Children of fallen soldiers receive support." The social worker in charge, a thin woman named Miss Harper with tired hazel eyes, glasses slipping down her nose and a cardigan 2 sizes too big, fidgeted awkwardly. Well, according to records, Daniel wasn't eligible. Something about missing documentation. "Show me." David's tone left no room for argument. Miss Harper pulled out the file. Inside, the original documents had indeed been filed. Birth certificate, father's service record, death notice, all legitimate. But a single, dismissive note had been stamped across the page. "Case closed. Incomplete documents. Benefits denied." The signature belonged to the head of the department, Leonard Hargrove, a man known in political circles for his slicked-back hair, too white smile, tailored suits, and reputation for finding creative ways around regulations. David knew his type well. Ambitious, charming in public, but rotten beneath the surface. "This isn't incompetence," David said coldly. "This is deliberate." James stepped closer. "Meaning?" "Meaning," David growled. "Someone has been stealing Daniel's benefits for years." He looked at the boy, this 12-year-old who carried himself like someone twice his age, and felt a protective fire ignite inside him. "James," David said, voice low but steady, "we need to investigate this. Together." The officer nodded without hesitation. "Agreed." Daniel watched the 2 men, the millionaire he saved and the officer who rescued him, speaking with conviction. For the first time in his young life, Daniel felt something unfamiliar but warm bloom quietly in his chest. Hope. And the chapter closed on 3 lives now bound by fate, and the first steps toward uncovering a truth long buried beneath corruption. Morning sunlight cut through the thin veil of city haze, painting the courthouse exterior in muted gold as if the day itself demanded truth. Inside a cramped office at the precinct, James Turner sat hunched over a cluttered desk, his broad shoulders tense as he scanned a stack of documents spread before him. His dark brown eyes, normally calm, disciplined, held a sharp edge now, sharpened by betrayal against a child who deserved none of it. Beside him, David Whitmore stood tall, immaculate in a charcoal gray suit that contrasted with his silver hair. Though still recovering from his heart attack, he carried himself with the force of a man who had built empires and refused to bow to corruption. His jaw was tight, expression carved from granite. "This," David said, his voice low, "is enough to bury him." James nodded. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank transfers hidden in auxiliary accounts, digital trails that, thanks to David's corporate cybersecurity team, linked Leonard Hargrove directly to diverted welfare funds. Dozens of children marked ineligible, every case leading back to him. One crime repeated until it became routine. And Daniel Collins was just one of many. Rex, James's 3-year-old Belgian Malinois, padded quietly beneath the desk. His coat was sleek sable, eyes amber bright and alert. He sensed the tension in the room and pressed his head gently against James's knee, a silent reassurance only a trained K-9 could give. The door opened. Detective Marcy Hale entered swiftly. She was in her early 40s, tall and thin with short copper hair and sharp cheekbones. Her expression was one of perpetual irritation, but those who knew her understood she wore that look to mask the toll of years spent fighting the system from the inside. She tossed a folder on the desk. "Search warrant approved. Judge Lopez signed it herself." David let out a breath. "Good. Let's finish this." The raid happened 2 hours later. Leonard Hargrove's office was on the top floor of the Welfare Administration building, a polished space with glass walls, modern furniture, and an expensive abstract painting that covered half a wall, the kind chosen to signal sophistication. Leonard himself stood at the window when the officers arrived. He was in his mid-50s, handsome in a slick way, with meticulously combed silver hair and a tan that spoke of frequent vacations rather than outdoor work. His tailored navy suit accentuated a confident posture, but his eyes, gray and cold, shifted with calculation the moment he saw James and Marcy enter with badges raised. "What is the meaning of this?" Leonard asked sharply, but his voice wavered ever so slightly when he spotted David behind them. David met his gaze with the calm of a man who has already won. "We know what you've done," he said quietly. Leonard tried to laugh it off, but the twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "You're making a mistake. My records are impeccable." "Which makes it easier," James replied, stepping forward, "because every false entry is your name. Every child you stole from is tied directly to you, and every dollar you pocketed, we have it all documented." Officers cuffed him before he could craft another lie. As the metal clicked shut, his confident facade collapsed, revealing the petty desperation beneath. "You don't understand," he sputtered. "It wasn't personal." "That's the problem," David said. "It should have been." The trial unfolded quickly thanks to the avalanche of evidence James and David had gathered. In the courtroom, parents, veterans' widows, and social workers whose voices had long been ignored finally had the chance to speak. Daniel attended the hearing, accompanied by James. He wore the clean clothes David had bought him, a simple navy hoodie and jeans, and his curls fell gently around his forehead as he sat quietly, absorbing every word. When the judge read the sentence, 15 years for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of office, the courtroom exhaled as one. It wasn't just justice, it was release. After the verdict, a representative from the Department of Veterans Affairs, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Mills with soft eyes and streaks of gray in her braided hair, approached them. "We've audited every case Hargrove touched," she explained. "All children affected will receive back pay and be reassigned dedicated case managers. I am deeply sorry." She handed Daniel a folder containing his restored file, his father's service record, his rightful benefits, proof of the support he had been denied. Daniel held the folder with trembling hands. For the first time in years he felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not uncertainty, but security, a foundation. Sandra placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Your father was a hero, Daniel. You deserve every bit of this." Outside the courthouse the air felt lighter, the sun warmer, as if the city itself recognized something important had been set right. Daniel looked up at the two men beside him, James, the steady protector, and David, the man his father once saved. Gratitude swelled in his chest until he struggled to find words. He didn't need to. David rested a reassuring hand on his back. "It's over now," he said. "You're safe, and this is just the beginning." Daniel swallowed hard, but his eyes shone with determination. For the first time, the boy who had lived in the shadows could imagine a future shaped not by survival, but by hope. A soft breeze drifted across the late afternoon sky, carrying with it the distant laughter of children playing somewhere beyond the rows of townhouses. The world felt gentler now, as though the city itself recognized that something long broken was slowly being repaired. Daniel Collins sat on the edge of a neatly made bed inside his new room, a modest, sunlit space within a community home operated by vetted guardians. There were clean sheets, a sturdy wooden desk, a small bookshelf, and a window overlooking a quiet courtyard. It wasn't grand, but to Daniel it was everything. For the first time in years, he slept without fear of footsteps in the dark or fists demanding money he didn't have. The social worker assigned to him, Mrs. Thompson, was a kind, round-faced woman in her 50s with a soft gray bun and warm brown skin. She had a soothing voice, the type that made children instinctively lower their shoulders and breathe easier. She checked on him regularly, not out of duty but genuine affection. "If you need anything, Daniel, anything at all, you come to me, okay?" she told him on the first day. He had nodded, though still learning how to trust such warmth. James Turner visited often, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in a simple black t-shirt and jeans that made him look more like a protective older brother than a police officer. His short beard, rugged jawline, and calm dark eyes gave him the appearance of someone built to stand between danger and those who couldn't defend themselves. Rex always came along too, trotting eagerly into Daniel's room, tail wagging, amber eyes glowing with recognition. Daniel adored the dog, whose fierce exterior softened remarkably whenever the boy scratched behind his ears. "Rex likes you," James said once with a faint smile. "He doesn't like many people." "Maybe he knows I'm safe now," Daniel replied quietly. James's smile widened, pride warm in his gaze. "You are. And you're not alone anymore, kid." Meanwhile, David Whitmore was moving mountains. After the court case concluded, after justice was served, he retreated into weeks of meetings, calls, and planning sessions. His company headquarters, an impressive glass building overlooking the river, buzzed with unusual energy. David's assistants whispered about his newfound mission, while investors tried to understand why the CEO seemed more driven than ever. David spent hours with lawyers, veteran organizations, financial analysts, and community leaders. Anyone who saw him now noticed the same thing: a man on a righteous crusade. One evening, while reviewing proposals in his office, he paused at an old photograph. In it, a young Michael Collins grinned, arm slung over David's shoulders, dust and sweat from deployment staining their uniforms. Behind them, tents and armored vehicles blurred into a sun-baked horizon. David traced the edge of the photo with tired fingers. "You saved me," he whispered, "and now your boy saved me too. I won't fail him, Mike. I won't fail any of them." Weeks later, the press conference took place in a spacious community hall adorned with flags and banners. News reporters set up cameras, flashes flickered, and a crowd of veterans, families, and city officials filled the room. At the center of the hall stood a tall podium marked with a freshly painted emblem, the Fallen Shield Foundation. Beneath it, a simple line, "For the children of our heroes." The foundation's mission was clear: housing, scholarships, mentorship, counseling, medical care, and long-term support for children of fallen service members, those who had been forgotten, neglected, or lost in the cracks of the system. When David stepped onto the stage, dressed in a dark navy suit that contrasted with his silver hair, the room fell silent. His presence carried authority, but his eyes held something softer: gratitude, purpose, remembrance. Daniel stood beside him wearing a clean white shirt, his curls neatly trimmed, his expression both nervous and hopeful. James stood nearby as security, though everyone knew he was there as family. David placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady yet warm, "this young man saved my life. He performed CPR while others panicked, but he didn't learn that courage from nowhere." He paused, eyes moistening. "He learned it from his father, Staff Sergeant Michael Collins, a soldier, a friend, a hero who once saved my life on a battlefield far from here." Soft murmurs rippled across the crowd. Daniel blinked rapidly, fighting emotion. David continued. Daniel should have been protected by the system. Instead, he was forgotten, and that is unacceptable. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled. So, today, I am proud to announce the formation of the Fallen Shield Foundation. Its purpose is simple: no child of a fallen service member will ever be abandoned again. He took a breath, then spoke the line that would echo across headlines for days. "And, from this moment on, I will personally support Daniel until he turns 18. That is my responsibility to the man who saved my life, and my gratitude to the boy who did it again." Daniel's composure shattered. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he turned and wrapped his arms around David. The embrace was not just emotional, it was transformative. It was a fatherless boy finding a protector, and a man burdened by old ghosts finding redemption. Applause erupted, long and heartfelt. Some veterans wiped tears. Even James cleared his throat as Rex nudged his leg. The story closed on a quiet yet powerful scene. Daniel running through the city park with James and Rex at his side, laughter echoing through the open air. David watched from a nearby bench, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped, a soft smile touching the lines of his seasoned face. To him, the boy was not just a duty or a promise. He was family. And in that warm, golden moment, the man who once lost a brother on the battlefield felt as if a piece of the past had finally been returned home. In the end, Daniel's story reminds us that miracles still walk beside us, often in the smallest hands and the quietest hearts. Some say miracles are thunder in the sky, but more often they are the gentle nudge that turns a stranger into family, a moment of courage into a lifetime of hope. Perhaps it was God's hand that guided a homeless boy toward a collapsing man, or perhaps it was his way of stitching two broken pieces of the past back together. In a world that moves too fast, where people pass each other without truly seeing, this story asks us to look again. There is a Daniel on every corner, a James on every street, a David in every crowd carrying wounds no one can see. And there is always a chance for a small act of bravery to change a life. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness is not gone. Leave a comment to stand with every forgotten child who deserves a future. Subscribe if you believe that compassion still matters, that ordinary people can become protectors, and that God still works quietly through the lives of those willing to stop, to help, to love. May the Lord bless you for being here, for listening, for caring, and may He guide your steps so that when the next moment comes where someone needs a miracle, you will be ready to be that miracle.